I never thought a simple clock could ruin my life. That morning, as I stared at the cracked face of my old alarm, its ticking felt like a cruel reminder that I was already late again. The bus had broken down, my son had been coughing all night, and the babysitter never showed up. By the time I reached the glass doors of the company, my hands were shaking, my hair was a mess, and I could feel every judgmental eye in the lobby cutting through me. "Late again, Ms. Reed?" My manager, Mr. Collins, said coldly as he glanced at his watch. I opened my mouth to explain, but he didn't care. "We all have problems. But this company runs on discipline," he said, before walking away. I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I swallowed them. I needed this job. I needed the paycheck. I had rent due in 3 days, and my son's medicine wasn't cheap. I rushed to my desk, trying to disappear into the hum of keyboards and ringing phones, but the whispers followed me. "She's always late," someone muttered. "Single moms always bring drama." I clenched my fists under the table, wishing they knew what I was fighting through every day, waking up at 5 a.m., getting my son ready, skipping breakfast, running to buses that never came on time. But explaining wouldn't help. People don't care about excuses when you're at the bottom. Around noon, the HR email came. My stomach dropped as I read the subject line. Final warning. My vision blurred as I scrolled through the message, each sentence like a punch to my chest. Any further lateness will result in termination. I bit my lip, forcing myself not to cry at my desk. I told myself I'd be early tomorrow no matter what. I'd walk if I had to. I'd leave my son with a neighbor. Anything. But fate had other plans. The next morning, a storm hit, flooding half the streets. I tried to push my son's stroller through the rain, my shoes sinking into the mud. By the time I reached the office soaked, shivering, clutching his tiny hand, it was 9:18 a.m., and waiting at my desk was the HR manager, holding an envelope that would change everything. I knew what was inside that envelope before she even said a word. Her face was stiff, her voice rehearsed, like she'd done this 100 times before. "I'm sorry, Ms. Reed, but your employment with Westbrook Enterprises has been terminated effective immediately." The words echoed in my ears as my son tugged at my sleeve, asking softly, "Mommy, why are you crying?" I tried to smile, but my lips trembled too hard. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's just tired." The HR manager avoided my eyes as she handed me a small box for my belongings. I felt everyone's stares burning into my back as I packed my things, pictures of my son, the cheap mug I got from the office Christmas party, and the notebook filled with ideas I'd never get to share. Every step toward the exit felt heavier than the last. When I reached the front doors, I turned for one last look. The office lights were too bright, too cold, and I realized I had spent years trying to fit into a world that never cared if I drowned. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. I sat on the bus stop bench with my son curled up beside me, his little hands clutching the wet box of my things. "Are we going home?" he asked. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going home." My voice cracked, but I forced a smile because he needed to see hope, even when I couldn't feel it. The next few days were a blur of rejection emails and unpaid bills. I pawned my old phone to buy groceries and borrowed money from a neighbor for my son's antibiotics. Nights were the worst. When he slept, I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how everything had fallen apart so fast. One night I wrote an email to Mr. Collins, half anger, half desperation. I told him I wasn't lazy or careless, that I was doing everything I could. I hit send before I could stop myself, knowing he'd probably never reply. But what I didn't know was that my message didn't just reach him. Somehow, it was forwarded to someone far above him, to a man whose name everyone in the building whispered, but few ever saw. The CEO himself, and that single email would change everything. I didn't expect a reply, not from someone like him. Daniel Hayes, the CEO of Westbrook Enterprises, was the kind of man who appeared only in glossy magazines or behind the tinted windows of black cars. So when an email popped up the next morning with his name in the sender line, I froze. My fingers trembled as I opened it. "Ms. Reed," it began, "I read your message. Please come to the office tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'd like to discuss this in person." My heart raced. I didn't know if it was a trap or a miracle. I barely slept that night, replaying every moment in my head. What if he just wanted to scold me again, or worse, accuse me of lying? But something in the tone of his email felt different. The next morning, I dressed in my cleanest clothes and left early, walking most of the way because I couldn't afford the bus. My son stayed with a neighbor, and I promised I'd be back soon. When I entered the glass doors again, the same receptionist who once ignored me suddenly looked confused, even nervous. "Mr. Hayes is expecting you," she said quietly. I followed her to the top floor, where everything smelled of expensive leather and silence. The office was huge floor-to-ceiling windows, a city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Behind a sleek desk sat Daniel Hayes, calm but serious, his eyes sharp, observant. "Please, have a seat," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. I sat down, my hands clenched tightly on my lap. "I read your email," he continued, his voice steady. "You've been late several times, yet your record before that was nearly flawless. What happened?" His tone wasn't cruel, just curious, and before I knew it, the words spilled out. I told him everything: the broken bus routes, the babysitter who quit without warning, my son's illness, the nights I stayed awake worrying if we'd have a roof over our heads. My voice cracked halfway through, but he didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finally stopped, there was silence. Then he leaned forward, his eyes softer now. "Why didn't you tell anyone sooner?" he asked quietly. I laughed bitterly. "Because people like me don't get listened to, sir. We just get replaced." For a moment he didn't say anything. The room felt painfully quiet, the hum of the city below muffled by the thick glass. Daniel Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying me like he was trying to piece together a puzzle he hadn't known existed. "You're right," he finally said, his tone low but sincere. "Too often, people at the top forget what it's like for those at the bottom." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, staring at my hands. He stood up and walked toward the window, his reflection merging with the storm clouds outside. "Do you know I grew up with a single mother too?" he asked suddenly. I looked up, startled. He turned toward me, his face softer now. "She worked 3 jobs. I remember watching her cry in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep. She was never late, but she was always tired. She used to say, 'The world won't wait for you, Danny, so you run faster, even when your feet bleed.'" His voice caught slightly at the end, and for the first time he didn't sound like a CEO. He sounded human. "Ms. Reed," he continued, "you shouldn't have been treated that way. No one even bothered to ask why you were struggling." I blinked, unsure if I was hearing him right. "I'm not asking for sympathy," I said quickly, my pride still burning. "I just wanted a fair chance." He smiled faintly. "And that's exactly what I intend to give you." My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean?" He walked back to his desk, picked up a folder and handed it to me. Inside was a new contract, same position, same salary, but this time with flexible hours, and a note handwritten at the bottom. "Childcare support available upon request." My eyes filled with tears I couldn't hold back anymore. "Sir, he raised a hand gently. "Don't thank me yet. Prove to everyone why you were worth fighting for." For the first time in months, I smiled, truly smiled. As I left his office, I felt lighter, like the weight I'd been carrying had finally started to lift. But little did I know, not everyone was happy about my return. When I walked back into that office the next week, the air felt different, thicker somehow. The same people who used to ignore me now whispered behind their screens, pretending to work. I could feel their eyes following me as I took my seat, the same desk I had packed up just days before. Mr. Collins passed by, his jaw tight, his steps clipped. "Back so soon?" he muttered, his tone laced with disbelief. "Mr. Hayes asked me to return," I replied softly, trying to stay calm. His eyes narrowed. "Of course he did," he said, walking away. But I could tell he wasn't pleased. The first few days were uneasy. My colleagues treated me like a ghost, someone who had somehow cheated the system. But I didn't care anymore. I had a job, a second chance, and I was determined not to waste it. I worked late when I could, submitted every report on time, and slowly started to regain my footing. Yet there was something strange happening. Some of my files were disappearing from the system, emails were mysteriously lost, and once, a project I had spent weeks perfecting was sent to the client with errors I hadn't made. When I tried to explain, Mr. Collins shrugged. "Maybe you're just tired again, Reed," he said with a smirk. I knew it wasn't a mistake. Someone was trying to sabotage me, but I kept quiet. I couldn't afford another confrontation, not when the CEO himself had given me a lifeline. One afternoon, Daniel Hayes called me to his office again. "How's everything going?" he asked. I hesitated, then said carefully, "It's okay. I'm grateful, but I think someone's been tampering with my work." He frowned, his eyes sharp. "Do you have proof?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He leaned back, thinking. "Then find it. Quietly. I'll handle the rest." His confidence gave me strength. That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind, checking my sent emails, tracking changes in shared documents. And then I saw logs showing edits made under my name at hours I wasn't even logged in. My stomach twisted as I clicked further, revealing the username behind those changes. It wasn't a stranger. It was Mr. Collins himself. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. Mr. Collins, the same man who fired me, the same man who sneered at me every chance he got, had been behind everything. Every mistake, every missing file, every email that made me look incompetent, it was all him. I sat there frozen, my heart pounding in my chest so loud it drowned out the ticking of the wall clock. Part of me wanted to confront him right then, to scream in his face for trying to destroy me all over again. But Daniel Hayes' voice echoed in my mind. "Find proof. Quietly." So I took screenshots every log, every timestamp, every digital fingerprint that tied his name to the sabotage. I saved them all to a USB drive and tucked it into my pocket, trying not to let the panic show on my face. The next morning, Collins greeted me with his fake smile. "Good morning, Reed," he said smugly, leaning against my desk. "I hope you're adjusting well. The CEO seems quite fond of you." His tone dripped with sarcasm, and I forced a polite smile. "I'm doing my best," I said softly. He chuckled. "Let's hope your best is good enough this time." I wanted to tell him I knew everything, but I stayed quiet. Instead, I went straight to Daniel Hayes' office at lunchtime. He looked up from his desk when I entered. "You found something?" I nodded, plugging in the USB. As he scrolled through the files, his face darkened. "Unbelievable," he muttered. He thought he could hide this? When he looked back at me, his expression was firm. "Leave this with me. I'll take care of it." My chest tightened with both fear and relief. I didn't know what he planned to do, but I trusted him. The rest of the day felt endless. Collins strutted around the office like he owned the place, completely unaware that his downfall was already set in motion. Hours later, just before closing time, a sudden silence swept across the room as Daniel Hayes appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Collins," he said calmly. "My office, now." Collins's smirk vanished, replaced by confusion. As they disappeared behind the glass doors, I could feel my pulse in my throat. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew karma had finally arrived. The entire office went still. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the clack of someone nervously typing just to break the silence. Everyone pretended to work, but every eye was glued to the frosted glass of the CEO's office, where Daniel Hayes and Mr. Collins stood face to face. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could feel the tension even from my desk. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, the door opened. Collins stormed out, his face pale and furious. He didn't look at anyone as he grabbed his coat and slammed his ID badge onto the reception desk. "Security will escort you out." Daniel's calm voice followed him, steady and final. The guard appeared seconds later, and just like that, the man who had made my life miserable was gone. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. Daniel turned his gaze to the rest of us. "Let this be a reminder," he said evenly, "that integrity isn't optional in this company. Ms. Reed, may I see you in my office?" My stomach fluttered with nerves as I followed him in. He gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing, unsure what to say. "You were right," he said. "Collins was behind the tampering. You handled this with patience and restraint, something most people wouldn't have managed." "I just didn't want to cause trouble," I said quietly. He smiled faintly. "You caused justice instead." Then, to my shock, he slid a different folder across the desk. "This is for you. A promotion to team supervisor. You've earned it." My breath caught. "Sir, this can't be real." "It is," he said simply. "You've proven you can lead even under pressure. I'd be a fool not to recognize that. My eyes stung with tears as I nodded, whispering, "Thank you." He stood and extended his hand. "No, Ms. Reed. Thank you for reminding this company what real strength looks like." When I left his office, people stared again, but this time it felt different. There was no pity, no judgment, just quiet respect. I sat down at my desk, placed my hand over my son's photo, and whispered, "We did it." But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The next few weeks felt like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. For the first time in years, life wasn't just about surviving. It was about moving forward. My days were still long, but they felt lighter now, filled with purpose instead of dread. As team supervisor, I led meetings, managed projects, and for once, people listened when I spoke. Some colleagues who used to whisper behind my back now came to me for guidance. It was strange how quickly things changed when respect replaced judgment. Every evening when I got home, my son would run into my arms shouting, "Mommy's home," and I'd feel that surge of warmth I couldn't describe. I'd cook dinner, help him with homework, and tell him bedtime stories where the heroes never gave up, no matter how hard things got. But late at night, when the apartment grew quiet, I'd still think about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the struggle, the fear of losing everything. It had scarred me, but it also shaped me. One Friday afternoon, as I was organizing files, Daniel Hayes appeared at my desk again. "Ms. Reed," he said with that calm smile of his, "I wanted to personally thank you for the changes you've brought here. The department has never run smoother." "I'm just doing my job, sir," I replied. He chuckled softly. "You're doing far more than that." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "You know, when I first read your email, I expected anger or blame. But instead I saw honesty. That's rare." I felt my cheeks warm. "I was just desperate, sir. I didn't know who else to turn to." "Desperation," he said thoughtfully, "reveals character, and yours is stronger than most." Before leaving, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a voucher for a weekend getaway, a reward, he said, "for you and your son. You've earned it." For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It wasn't just a gift, it was recognition, something I'd never had before. That weekend, as my son and I watched the sunset from a quiet lakeside cabin, he turned to me and said, "Mommy, you're smiling again." And I realized he was right. I finally was. That weekend by the lake changed something inside me. It was the first time in years I had allowed myself to breathe without fear of what tomorrow might bring. My son laughed more than he had in months, chasing dragonflies by the water's edge while I sat on the porch, a cup of coffee warming my hands. I thought about how close I had come to giving up, how the world had tried to break me over and over again. But sitting there, watching the golden sunlight dance across the rippling water, I realized something powerful. Sometimes rock bottom isn't the end. It's the foundation you rebuild yourself on. When we returned home, I was ready for whatever came next. But life has a way of testing you even when you think the storm has passed. A week later, Mr. Collins's name came up again, this time in an internal audit. Apparently, my case wasn't the only one. He had sabotaged multiple employees, covering his own failures by blaming others. HR asked me for a statement, and though the thought of reliving those painful months made my chest tighten, I knew I had to do it. I owed it not just to myself, but to everyone he had hurt. When the investigation concluded, Daniel Hayes called me to his office one last time. "You helped uncover a pattern of injustice in this company," he said firmly. "Because of you, we're changing how we treat our staff, especially working parents." I could hardly believe it. My pain had started a conversation that reached the very top. As I stood to leave, he added, "Ms. Reed, resilience isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up, even when the ground is still shaking." Those words stayed with me. That evening, I walked home under the city lights, feeling a quiet strength I'd never known before. When my son ran into my arms, I held him tighter than ever, whispering, "We made it." I knew we still had a long road ahead, but this time I wasn't afraid. Because now I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And I was teaching my son that no matter how dark the night gets, there's always a sunrise waiting to find you. Months passed, and my life slowly transformed into something I never thought I'd have, a life built not on fear, but on faith and hard-earned peace. I became someone people turned to for advice, someone trusted, respected, and even admired. There were still challenges, of course, late nights, sick days, the endless balancing act of motherhood, but now I faced them with confidence instead of dread. One morning, as I dropped my son off at school, he hugged me tightly and said, "Mommy, I want to be strong like you when I grow up." I smiled through tears because I finally realized that every sleepless night, every tear I had cried, every moment I thought I had failed, it had all been worth it for him to see what strength truly looked like. Back at work, Daniel Hayes continued to push for reforms that supported single parents, childcare options, flexible scheduling, and transportation assistance. My story had started something bigger than I ever intended. One afternoon, he called me into his office for a final meeting. "I'm stepping back for a few months," he told me, "and I need someone I trust to handle operations while I'm gone. I want that person to be you." For a moment, I couldn't even speak. Me? The woman who was once fired for being late? "Are you sure, sir?" I asked softly. He nodded. "More than sure. You've proven not just your skill, but your heart. This company needs both." My voice trembled as I whispered, "Thank you. I won't let you down." He smiled. "I know you won't." When I left his office, I walked to the window overlooking the city. The same city that once felt cruel and unforgiving now looked beautiful, full of second chances. I thought about where I had started, standing in the rain with my son, jobless and broken, and where I was now. Life had come full circle, but this time, I wasn't the woman who begged to be seen. I was the woman who earned her place. And as the sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the sky in shades of gold, I whispered to myself, "We didn't just survive. We rose." And for the first time, I truly believed it.